The first thing anyone noticed was the silence. Not the total silence of an empty street at 3 in the morning, but the particular held breath kind that rolls through a gathering when it forgets all at once that it was ever doing anything else. Midtown Manhattan on a Tuesday afternoon in October had approximately 40,000 better things to do than stop. Tourists with their necks craned toward glass towers, delivery guys threading bikes through cabs, office workers power walking with salads they would not taste. The grid had been performing its own chaos for 400 years, and it did not pause for anything. It paused for her. She stood at the corner of 7th Avenue and 53rd Street, and the word "stood" barely covered it. She occupied the corner. She claimed it the way empires claim territory, without a signature on any document, without a ceremony, without even the courtesy of announcing an intention. One moment the sidewalk was a sidewalk. The next moment, it was the forecourt of something that did not have a name yet in this place. Tall, black hair falling straight past her shoulders, no wind daring to disturb it. A dress that fit her the way marble fits a great statue, as if it had been made by someone who understood that the point was not the covering, but the form beneath. Gold earrings shaped like serpents, small and precise, catching the October light. Heels on the pavement that should have been impractical and were instead simply correct, the way a crown is correct on the right head. She surveyed Midtown the way a person surveys a room they have already decided not to like. The delivery guy on the bicycle hit a cab. Not badly a tap-a-scrape, the kind of minor collision that normally produces a 30-second argument in 3 languages. Both men turned toward the noise they had made, glanced at each other, then turned toward her instead. The argument did not happen. They forgot they had been about to have it. A woman in a Vought-branded tote bag stopped mid-step and stood with her coffee tilted at an angle that should have spilled it. It did not spill. The woman did not notice. She was staring at the corner of 7th and 53rd with an expression that belonged more to a pilgrim than a commuter. Across the street, a Vought Plus billboard cycled through its rotation. Homelander arms crossed, smile locked, and nobody glanced at it. Nobody glanced at it for the rest of the afternoon. The phones came out within 45 seconds. Of course they did. This was a place that had once filmed a sinkhole swallowing a food truck and posted it before the truck finished sinking. Cameras up, live streams running. The comments arrived in real time beneath the shaky verticals and horizontals. Who is she? No, for real. Who is she? At Vought, is this a promo? Where's the press release? Step on me. Step on me. Step on me. Mommy, I'm sorry, she's not even looking at anyone, and I think I'm going to cry. I'd sell my father's entire 401k for 1 second of her attention. She wasn't looking. That was the thing the cameras caught and the clips would preserve, and the analysts at Vaught's social monitoring team would replay 17 times. At 1:30 in the morning, she was not performing for the phones. She was not acknowledging the phones. She studied the street the way a naturalist studies a species of insect, with detachment and a mild contempt for the insect's failure to be more interesting. She let the observation settle outward from her like a slow exhale. It was not something anyone in this place had language for, so it registered as nothing, no visible shimmer, no sound, no signal any instrument could have read. But she felt it spread across the block like a net across water, and what returned to her was not words or images, but the raw texture of intent. She couldn't hear thoughts. She didn't need to. Intent was louder than language. The onlooker's hunger was bright and familiar, the specific craving of people who had learned to consume the remarkable rather than witness it. They wanted her to do something. They wanted her to be content they could hold in a rectangle and show other people. They wanted the story more than the fact. underneath the craving pockets of colder calculation. She recognized the temperature from other ports, other islands, other courts where power played dress-up in whatever costume the era required. Someone was already making calls. Someone was already thinking about what she represented and how it could be managed and what the management would cost. She withdrew the sense and returned to the surface of the world. This place doesn't worship the strong, she concluded without speaking it. It devours them and calls it content. A man in his mid-30s pushed forward through the onlookers. He had the particular confidence of someone who had never been refused anything by a woman, and had decided this was a law of nature rather than a streak of luck. He reached out a hand, not grabbing, not yet. But the intent was there in the angle of his wrist, and the set of his mouth, the casual presumption that her body was a thing he was entitled to test. She fixed her gaze on him. Just that. Nothing else. His hand dropped. His knees buckled not fully, not to the ground, but one involuntary dip, a hitch in the body's confidence that his face had not authorized. The phones caught it. 3 separate streams cut to slow-motion replay within the hour. He straightened, and his expression cycled through several things very quickly. Bravado, confusion, and then something much more honest that he would never admit to anyone. He stepped back. He did not decide to step back. His nervous system made the decision without consulting him. She had already turned away. She turned away from him the way you turn away from a chair you have finished using. 3 blocks north, a man named Derek Chen sat in a black SUV outside a parking garage and watched the cluster of phones and upturned faces on his security monitor. Derek worked for Vought International's Advanced Threat Assessment Division, which was a department name that meant we find things that do not fit the system, and we figure out what to do with them before anyone else gets a turn. He had been on rotation for 6 hours. He had been watching this particular situation for 4 minutes. He picked up his phone. "It's Chen," he said. "I'm going to need a classification meeting. Like now." "What are we looking at?" Derek watched the monitor. The gathering had grown to perhaps 200 people and was still expanding, and the woman at the center of it had not moved, had not spoken, had not acknowledged the cameras. She stood the way things stand when they have nothing to prove. "I don't know yet," Derek said. "But the 7 are going to hear about this before I finish my coffee, and when they do, it's going to be a problem." The clip hit 1 million views in 11 minutes. By the time it crossed 2 million, the comment section had fractured into its predictable warring factions. The people certain she was a Vought promotional stunt for a new hero rollout. The people certain she was CGI. The people who had already made her a meme in a quieter stranger group who weren't saying much at all. Just watching on repeat something shifting in them that they didn't have a precise name for. Vaught's social team flagged it at the 90-second mark. Standard protocol. Unverified super public exposure, no contract, no clearance, no coordinated PR rollout. Ashley Barrett, head of Hero Management, got the notification on her personal phone while she was in a production meeting about the Deep's aquatic rehabilitation arc, and she looked at the clip and she said, "Oh, for the love of," and walked out of the meeting without finishing the sentence. She called Stan Edgar's office. His assistant told her he was aware. "He's aware," Ashley said. "It's been 12 minutes. "He's aware," the assistant repeated in the tone that meant the conversation was over. Stan Edgar at that moment was sitting in his office on the 63rd floor of Vought Tower with a cup of coffee he had not touched and a tablet displaying the same clip Ashley had seen. He watched it once. He watched the man's knees buckle. He watched the way the onlookers maintained their distance. Not coordinated, not instructed, purely instinctive, the way animals self-organize around something they cannot categorize. He set the tablet down. His assistant appeared in the doorway. Monitoring wants to know if you're activating the asset acquisition protocol. Edgar picked up his coffee. Hold, he said. And tell legal I want the unregistered super clause on my desk before end of day. And if she moves, then we'll find out where she goes. He took a sip. You don't rush at something like this with the net. You watch it. You learn what it wants. Then you offer it something it can't refuse. He set the cup down. The click of it was very quiet and very certain. 32 floors below, in a legal compliance office with a view of a ventilation shaft, 2 junior attorneys were already drafting. The document was 40 pages. It covered exclusivity, image rights, jurisdiction, mandatory disclosure of powers, behavioral guidelines, and a clause on page 31, in a font size that required reading glasses that described certain arrangements as transferable property of Vought International under subsection 7C. They had drafted this kind of document before. They drafted it quickly and without irony, the way people do when they have been doing something long enough to forget that it should feel strange. The word asset appeared in the document 47 times. Nobody told them not to use it. She did move. 40 minutes after she had appeared on the corner of 7th and 53rd, she walked north. The onlookers trailed at a distance that no one planned or coordinated, but that everyone in the loose convoy maintained instinctively, the way animals keep distance from something whose nature they cannot categorize. She did not look back. She moved through the grid as if it had been laid out for her convenience, and the inconvenience of everyone else was not her concern. At some point during the walk, she could not have said exactly when the memory arrived without invitation. A particular laugh. A particular total lack of interest in the fact that she was beautiful, because beauty was irrelevant when there were adventures to chase. A particular idiocy that somehow made it sound never looked like idiocy from the inside. Her jaw tightened. Her pace did not change. Her expression remained exactly what it had been for the last 40 minutes. He's not here, she told herself with the precise firmness of someone addressing a subordinate who has raised an inappropriate topic during a formal proceeding. You are working. What she was working on was not yet clear even to herself. She had arrived in this place the way a storm arrives, not because it has a destination, but because the conditions produced it. The world she knew and this world had pressed against each other, and she had come through where they touched. It had happened before in different forms, different islands, different powers. The mechanics changed. The essential situation did not. There was always a world government. It wore different clothes in different centuries. Here it wore shareholder reports and brand partnerships and a tower with its name on top in letters tall enough to see from New Jersey. And it ran the same operation it had always run. Find the power, contain the power, monetize the power, and call the whole process civilization. She knew exactly what she was looking at. The question was what she intended to do about it. She stopped at a crosswalk on 58th Street while the light turned. Around her, the loose convoy of phones and open mouths stopped too crowding the corners, maintaining their instinctive buffer. A man at the front almost stepped off the curb. A woman beside him grabbed his arm. He looked at her blankly. She pointed at the light still red. He had been about to walk into traffic because he had forgotten the light existed, because he had forgotten for a moment that the ordinary world still ran on ordinary rules. The light changed. She crossed. The convoy crossed behind her. On a live stream currently pulling 230,000 concurrent viewers, a comment appeared and received 4,000 likes in under a minute. She's not lost. Manhattan is lost. She's just walking through it. By 6:17 p.m., She had been in Manhattan for just under 4 hours, and the clip count across all platforms had reached 11 million. 3 trending hashtags. A think piece in The Atlantic comparing her to various mythological archetypes. A cable segment in which 2 pundits debated whether she represented a national security threat or an opportunity for American soft power. Both pundits were wrong in ways that would have amused her if she had known about them, which she did not, because she had no interest in being explained by people who had not earned the right to explain anything. Derek Chen filed his formal report at 6:22, Vought's acquisition coordinator. A careful, experienced woman who had processed 43 unregistered supers in 9 years and thought she had seen every variation of unusual read-it reviewed the analytics and dispatched a contact team. Diplomatic approach first, full resources second. Standard operating procedure clean and efficient. The product of a system that had never yet encountered something it could not eventually process. She classified the situation as Category 1. Was older than Derek's division, older than Derek's division. That assumption was older than Derek's division, older than the asset acquisition protocol, older than the version of Vought that currently occupied 63 floors above Midtown. It was baked into the structure of the thing, the way certain ideas become invisible once they've been standard long enough. Above her, Edgar was still at his desk. Cold coffee, open analytics, the number 11 million. He thought about the number of hours it had taken the Seven's last major media event to reach equivalent saturation. It had been 3 days. 11 million in 4 hours was a different order of phenomenon entirely. He picked up his phone. When the team makes contact, he said, "I want real-time audio, polite, professional." The first conversation is an introduction, not a negotiation. A pause. "And tell them not to use the word asset." He hung up. He looked out at the grid below, lights coming on, as the October dark settled in 12 million people who had spent their afternoon discovering that the world contained something their categories did not cover. He allowed himself briefly to wonder what she wanted. Then, he set the thought aside and returned to work, because wondering what a target wanted was step 2. Step 1 was always make contact. Somewhere below she walked. The serpent earrings caught the last of the light. The convoy trailed. The phones recorded. Down in legal on page 31, the attorneys finished clause 7C and moved on to page 32 without looking up. The emergency meeting convened at 7:43 p.m. on the 47th floor of Vought Tower in a conference room that had survived over the years. A sex scandal, 2 manslaughter incidents, 1 near-nuclear event in Cincinnati, and the PR fallout from the Deep's ill-advised press tour. The people in it tonight were not yet sure it would survive this. Ashley Barrett had the clip running on the wall screen. She'd watched it approximately 30 times, and each time the man's knees buckled, she made a small, involuntary sound she refused to classify as distress. 11 million in 4 hours, she said. 30 by morning. 40 if anyone on the 7 reacts publicly, and I cannot stress this enough, nobody reacts publicly before we have a position. "We have a position," said the man from legal. His name was Price, and he carried the particular affect of someone who had spent 20 years converting human complexity into subsections. Unregistered super operating without clearance violation of the Superhero Management Act. She's a liability. More specifically, she's our liability until we bring her into compliance. She's not our liability. She's not our anything. That's the problem. She will be. Price dropped 40 tabbed pages onto the table. Image rights exclusivity, mandatory disclosure, behavioral parameters, standard package. I have added a clause on page 31 covering certain arrangements as transferable intellectual property. Ashley stared at the stack. She peeled a trained security detail off the sidewalk like stickers. Pre-signing behavioral issue. The clause covers it. From the head of the table, Edgar had not spoken. He had the clip frozen on a single frame, not the buckle, not the onlookers, but the moment just before when she fixed her gaze on the approaching man. He had cataloged human expressions professionally for 30 years, and he could not locate a category for this one. Not anger, not calculation. Something prior to both the way a pressure system precedes a flood before the first drop falls. Whatever it was, it did not leave room for counteroffers. "If we can't own her," Ashley said, "we can at least own the story. Right now, she's uncontextualized. Uncontextualized power becomes whatever people decide it is." Sister Sage, seated at the far end and silent for 11 minutes, tapped one finger against the table twice. Everyone stopped. "She's already contextualized," Sage said. "By herself. Half the comments aren't asking who she is, they're explaining her. They've decided what she means. The question isn't whether we can own the narrative. It's whether we can insert ourselves into one that's been running without us since 4 p.m. A beat of silence. "What does that mean for the contact team?" Ashley asked. "It means," Edgar said, still without turning from the frozen frame, "the team needs to be careful about their first sentence. Whatever she decides we are in 30 seconds, that's what we'll be." He turned. "Send them in. Diplomatic only. Tonight is for information, not acquisition." Price reached for his 40 pages. "Leave the filing," Edgar said. Price left it. Yet, the contact team located her at 9:11 p.m. on a pedestrian stretch along the Hudson, near a promenade that had been a jogging path 2 hours ago and was now something else, a kind of open-air court with no appointed judge and an audience that kept its distance without being asked. She had stopped walking. She stood at the railing above the water, the city's light doing things to the angle of her that no cinematographer had ever staged successfully, which was why the amateur clips were already circulating in production forums under the caption, "This cannot be real." Before the contact team reached her, the promenade reached her first. A man in his 20s had his phone aimed at her face from 6 feet away and was talking into it at low volume, the specific register of someone performing bravery for an audience. "Okay, so I'm just gonna go say hi, chat, see if she's..." He got within arm's reach. His hand went out. Not grabbing, just reaching the casual presumption that her proximity was a thing he was entitled to test. She didn't turn. She didn't speak. The observation had already placed him his shape in the field of intent, small and bright and entirely predictable. The pressure hit him like a closing door. He stumbled back 2 full steps, hand dropping, phone tilting. He looked at his own hand as if it had done something independently. Then he looked at her back, then at his phone, then at nothing in particular, and he walked away very quickly in the direction of the subway without finishing his sentence. His stream cut out. 400,000 people had been watching. The clip of him walking away. No visible contact, no sound. Just the stumble and the retreat would accumulate 8 million views by the following afternoon, almost entirely under the tag, "She didn't even look." The team lead, Marcus Webb, had watched the whole thing from 20 feet back. 14 years at Vought field operations. He had run acquisition conversations with Translucent with the Deep, and under circumstances not discussed with a former Teenage Kicks member who had developed an inconvenient conscience. He was measurably good at this. He adjusted his earpiece, straightened his jacket, and approached. "Ma'am, my name is Marcus Webb. I represent Vought International, and I want to start by saying, what happened today was extraordinary, and we want to make sure you have the support and resources to..." "You have 30 seconds, she said without turning. "Use them well." Webb recalibrated, shifted lanes. "We'd like to invite you to Vought Tower. Completely informal, just to talk about what comes next. For you, for your public profile, for the people already following your story. We can provide security accommodation, a structured security. She turned from the railing. Webb had been in field operations for 14 years. He revised his self-assessment in approximately 1 second. She hadn't read the paperwork. She couldn't have. But she'd felt it on him, not words, not specifics, but the shape of the intent beneath the words. The calculation, the clauses already drafted, the machinery that had been running since before he left the building. Intent was louder than language. It always had been. "You come to me at night," she said, "with 4 men behind you who believe they are being discreet. She did not look at them, and you offer me security." "We're here to help," Webb said. His voice held. He was proud of that. "You are here to acquire." The word landed like a diagnosis. "You came with paperwork written into your eyes, Mr. Webb. Your institution has already divided what I am into parts that can be owned, transferred, and billed quarterly." "I have seen this before." She tilted her head very slightly. "Different century, different costume, same cage with better lighting." One of the 4 men shifted. His hand moved toward his hip. She looked at him. The air changed. That was the only description that survived. Into the debrief reports, the incident filings, the conversations surviving team members eventually had with therapists they were not supposed to need. The air changed, not a sound, not a visible force, but a pressure that arrived from no direction, and every direction simultaneously, the kind biology has no protocol for, because biology had never needed one. 3 of the 4 men went down. Not violently. They folded knees first, then waist, the controlled collapse of something that has received an instruction it cannot refuse. The 4th stayed upright by seizing a railing post and producing a sound that did not qualify as language. Webb remained standing. He would think about this later. He suspected she had left him standing specifically to receive the next sentence. "Tell your employer," she said, "that I do not sign documents I have not requested. I do not go where I am directed, and I do not belong to anyone." 1 moment of eye contact, brief, absolute. "If it tries this again, I will be less instructive." She turned back to the railing. Webb crouched beside the nearest downed team member, who was conscious and uninjured and staring at the sky with the expression of someone who has undergone something they will never successfully explain at a dinner party. He pressed his earpiece. "This is Webb. Extraction Hudson Promenade. 4 down, no injuries." A breath. "I need Edgar on the line in 5 minutes, and someone's going to have to tell me what the hell that was." Above him on the body cam feed, already routing live to the monitoring station, the frame held her at the railing. The river below the tower's reflection, broken across the water, her back to everything Vought had sent. For 3 seconds, something adjacent to a memory moved through her. A particular grin, a particular person who had looked at her and found something other than a category to place her in. She sealed it away. Under 2 seconds, start to finish. "You are working," she reminded herself, and the reminder was not gentle. None of them had been permanent, these places that called themselves the center of the world. She had seen the type. Large, certain of themselves operating machinery they believed was eternal. The machinery was never eternal. It was just loud. The body cam footage reached Edgar's desk at 9:26. He watched it twice. He watched Webb's face during the pressure moment. He watched 3 trained professionals fold without physical contact. He watched her turn back to the railing as if completing an interruption. He called Ashley. "Pull the contact team. We haven't even started. Pull them." Same register, same volume. It never changed. "The approach we use tonight is not the approach that functions here. We need a different angle." "What angle, Stan? What angle works on someone who just... I don't know yet. For Stan Edgar, an extraordinary admission. He delivered it flatly, briefly, the way he said anything he didn't want on record. Get me the morning. Get me Sage. He ended the call before she could respond, which was the kind of thing he did when a conversation had delivered everything useful it was going to deliver. In the monitoring station, 4 floors down, a junior analyst had been watching the social feeds since 4 p.m. The sentiment graph had not done what sentiment graphs normally did, peak and decay. This one was still climbing at 10:30 p.m. Comment volume 4.2 million in the last hour. She's the only real thing that's happened in this city in 20 years. Vought is gonna try to put her in a costume. I'm actually praying I've watched it 40 times. I genuinely don't know what I'm feeling. I need more of it. She looked at that guy, and he knelt. No one touched him. He just knelt. If this is a promo, I don't care. I don't care if it's fake. I need it to keep happening. The analyst flagged the last cluster. The category was unprompted devotional response in non-fan demographics, a real metric. Vought maintained it because they'd encountered it before early Homelander, before the measurement standardized. Homelander's peak in his first week had been 31% of sample. Hers was at 58% after one afternoon. The analyst attached the note compare HLS 1 baseline rec. Executive review and sent it up. Then she refreshed the feed. You couldn't look away, even from a dashboard, especially from a dashboard. Ashley's all teams message went out at 10:47 p.m. 7 words. Nobody talks to the press. I mean nobody. 4 minutes later, a second. And Homelander hears nothing until morning. Are we clear? She knew it was wishful. Homelander had people. He always had people who told him things ahead of Ashley's preferred timeline, because that was the leverage mechanism. And Ashley had been on the receiving end of that mechanism for 8 consecutive years. By morning, he'd know. He always knew. She poured herself a drink from the cabinet that officially didn't exist. Stared at the branded, everything glowing below the billboards. The tower, the Sevens faces 60 feet tall on a building. Vought didn't own, but had the naming rights to, and said out loud, to nobody to the window, to the drink she hadn't touched. What the actual fuck are we supposed to do with someone who makes our entire playbook look like a strongly worded letter? 3 floors up, the 2 junior attorneys were on page 37. Drafting the subsection on declined initial protocols, escalation steps. Page 39, containment by alternative means. They didn't know what had happened at the Hudson Promenade. Their job was the filing. The filing would be complete by morning. It always was. That was the one thing about the machine that never changed, regardless of what the machine had failed to account for. Edgar's last call went to a number with no registered owner. Second ring. Awake and waiting. Already informed. She declined, Edgar said. I know. Standard approach. 0 traction. 4 personnel on the ground. I know that too. A pause that cost something. What I need, Edgar said, is leverage that isn't purchase and isn't direct threat. Something that makes cooperation the rational choice, because the alternative becomes specific and personal. He let a beat pass. Find what she'd refuse to leave unprotected, even in a world she has contempt for. That's the angle. Silence on the other end. Then, that's a more interesting problem. That's why I'm calling you at 11 p.m. Give me 48 hours. Edgar said nothing. When Stan Edgar said nothing, it meant yes. He set the phone down. He did not look at the frozen frame on his tablet, that expression with no available category. The one he'd been studying since 7:43. He was not a man who dwelt on problems he couldn't yet solve. He moved to the next one. Down in legal on page 39, the word containment sat at the top of a new subsection. Below it, 3 escalation options, each with its own subclauses, each drafted with the same professional neutrality applied to every other page of the filing. 40 pages. Complete by morning. The machine did not need to understand what it was processing. It only needed to keep processing. Somewhere along the Hudson, the railing was empty. She had already gone. The narrative launched at 6:14 a.m., before most of the city had finished its first coffee. Vought News Network led. There with a split screen on the left, the clip of Webb's team folding on the Hudson Promenade, edited, cropped, stripped of context, until it read as assault rather than consequence. On the right, a woman identified as Dr. Patricia Shelton, senior fellow at the Center for Public Safety Research, which had been incorporated 11 days ago and shared a mailing address with a Vought subsidiary in Delaware. What we're seeing, Dr. Shelton told the anchor, is a pattern consistent with documented psychic coercion events. The neurological effect on bystanders is real. It is measurable. And it is frankly something we should all be very concerned about. The anchor nodded with the precise degree of gravity that had been calibrated across 14 seasons to communicate this is serious. Without communicating, we have confirmed anything. So when you say psychic coercion, I'm saying that exposure, even indirect exposure, may produce involuntary behavioral changes. We don't yet know the range. We don't yet know the duration. Dr. Shelton paused for exactly long enough. What we do know is that an unregulated, unvetted individual is operating in a densely populated area with no oversight, no accountability, and no demonstrated interest in public safety. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, Empress threat experts warn of psychological hazard. By 7 a.m., 3 other networks had picked up the framing. By 8, the hashtag Empress Hazard had 200,000 posts, roughly 1/3 of which were sincere, 1/3 ironic, and 1/3 operating as deliberate counter-programming by people who had watched the original clip enough times to have developed opinions about it that Dr. Shelton's credentials could not touch. Hashtag Empress is real was running parallel faster, with no corporate infrastructure behind it at all. In the 47th floor conference room, same room, different morning, Ashley stared at both hashtag feeds on her tablet and said nothing for a full 30 seconds, which for Ashley was the equivalent of a long scream. The framing isn't holding, she said finally. Sage across the table had both hands wrapped around a coffee she wasn't drinking. The framing was never going to hold. You can't counter-narrative someone the public has already decided to experience. You can only redirect. Redirect to what she won't sign. She won't cooperate. She doesn't have representation, Sage. She has no agent, no publicist, no handler. There's nobody to call. That's the point. Sage set the coffee down. Every system we have for managing talent assumes the talent wants something from us. Visibility, revenue, protection. She doesn't want any of those things, which means every lever we reach for, she spread her hands slightly, isn't connected to anything. Ashley gestured at the screen where VNN was still running Dr. Shelton's segment on loop. They're saying screen exposure causes the effect too. That watching a clip, fear marketing, Sage said flatly. There are 0 confirmed remote petrification cases. They're implying contagion because contagion makes people feel like they need someone to manage the situation, namely us. She picked up her coffee again. It won't hold past noon. Someone with a platform will debunk it, and the correction will get 3 times the reach. Ashley's phone buzzed. She looked at Asiat, put it face down. Homelander. Homelander, Ashley confirmed. 3rd time this morning. I told him it's being handled. Is it? Ashley picked up her coffee, realized it was cold, and put it back down. Edgar has something in motion, 48-hour window. We just need her to not do anything catastrophic before. Her phone buzzed again. Face down again. Tell me the containment operation is not happening today. She said to no one specifically. Tell me someone had the sense to wait. Nobody told her that. The operation had been running since 5 a.m. It was not the kind of operation that appeared in official Vought documentation. It had no project code, no budget line, no chain of sign-offs. What it had was 3 men from a contractor Vought had used 4 times before for situations that required deniability, and a plan that had worked in various forms on 3 separate occasions, involving uncooperative soups who needed to be made to look dangerous before they could be made to disappear quietly. The plan was simple. It was always simple. You found the target in public. You put someone near them who would provoke a response. You had cameras in position before the provocation. You made sure the provocation looked on camera like an innocent approach, a fan, a journalist, someone harmless, and the response looked on camera like an attack. Then you had your footage. Then you had your public safety justification. Then you had your legal basis for containment. They had a man for the provocation role. His name did not matter. He was good at looking harmless. He had done this before. They found her at 9:20 a.m. in a plaza off 59th Street, where she had stopped near a fountain and stood with the particular stillness that the city had learned in 30 hours to give a very wide berth. The recording equipment was in position on 3 sides, 2 rigs and vehicles, 1 angle from a building opposite. The man walked toward her from the north, hand's visible expression calibrated to friendly curious. He had a small, flesh-colored earpiece in his right ear. He had remembered this morning to tuck the wire under his collar. He had not remembered that collars shift when you walk. Before he reached 10 feet, a man on the plaza's east edge decided this was the moment. He was not part of the contractor's plan. He was simply a man who had been standing there for 20 minutes, working up the specific variety of courage that functions as a substitute for judgment. He called out something the words do not bear repeating. The register was unmistakable and took 2 steps toward her from the side. She did not turn. She did not look at him. The pressure arrived in the space between his second and third step, quiet and absolute, a door closing in the air directly in front of him. He stopped. His mouth stayed open. He stood that way for 4 seconds, then turned and walked to the far end of the plaza with the deliberate, overly controlled pace of someone whose body has just received information their mind has not fully processed. He did not come back. Nobody else on that side of the plaza moved. The contractor's man had stopped walking during this. He started again. He got within 10 feet. She hadn't moved, hadn't turned. The observation had already mapped the plaza, not visually, not consciously, but as a field of intents, each one distinct in texture. The genuine fear of the bystanders who recognized her and were quietly relocating. The bright, hungry attention of the people recording on phones. The cold, directed purpose of the men in the vehicles, sharp-edged and coordinated in a way that had no civilian equivalent. And the man walking toward her, his intent was not curiosity. She could feel the performance of it, the shape of a role being worn, a costume of harmlessness, pulled over something planned and directed from elsewhere. She let him get to 8 feet. Then she turned. He stopped. His prepared expression, the friendly, curious one, the harmless one, did not survive contact with her attention. Whatever he saw in her face was not what the brief had prepared him for. "You are not a fan," she said. Her voice was not raised. It carried regardless because the surrounding space had arranged itself to receive it. "You are an instrument. Someone is speaking into your ear right now, telling you to smile." She tilted her head a degree. "I find it insulting that they thought this would require effort." The cameras had been rolling since he left the vehicle. They caught all of it. They caught what happened next. She raised one hand, not dramatically. The gesture was almost offhand, the way you'd wave away a minor inconvenience. The marrow energy moved from her palm in a thin, precise arc. A pistol kiss, not the broad slave arrow, not the sweeping mellow. Targeted. She was not in the business of wasting power on a man who was already paid to be here. It hit him in the center of his chest. The petrification moved outward from that point in the specific, deliberate way stone moves when it has been invited. No splash, no shatter, no explosion. It simply replaced. His expression, the one that had abandoned its performance, was preserved exactly as it was at the moment of contact. The expression of a man who has just been told something he already knew, but had hoped not to hear confirmed. He stood. He would continue to stand in that plaza for the next 11 hours, long enough for the city to learn what the word warning looked like in stone. After the release, after the shaking subsided, after he had confirmed that all his limbs still functioned, the first thing he said to the three men from the contractor was, "She knew. Before I got close, she already knew." The bystanders, who had not yet relocated, were now very still. Then they were moving fast in several directions, with their phones still pointed backward. The cameras in the vehicles had captured everything: her hand, the arc, the petrification. 40 seconds of footage. Clean, unambiguous. The contractor's team sat with that footage for 90 seconds. Then the senior man said very quietly, "This is not the clip we planned to have." He was correct. The clip they had planned would have shown an attack on an innocent man. The clip they had was something else entirely. It showed with complete clarity a woman identifying a trap, naming it out loud, and responding to it with the minimum force required. It showed incidentally the petrified man's expression at the moment of contact, which was not fear, not surprise, but the specific resignations of someone caught doing exactly what they had been caught doing. The internet received the clip at 9:37 a.m. unedited, from 6 different angles, because 6 different phones had been recording. By 10 a.m., the response had reorganized itself into familiar formations. Hashtag Empress Hazard collapsed within 40 minutes. Not because Vought pulled it, they didn't. They couldn't, the moment had passed, but because the users who had been running it in good faith encountered the 9:37 footage and quietly stopped posting. The ones running it in bad faith continued for another hour before the ratio became unsustainable. Hashtag She Knew emerged at 10:12 and accelerated faster than anything the analyst in the monitoring station had recorded in 9 years of tracking. The comment ecosystem resettled around new coordinates, she named it, before he got within 10 feet. She named it. The expression on his face when she said, "You are not a fan, sir. Sir." Vought really sent a guy, and she turned him to stone, and now he's just standing there as a warning. The statue is still there, by the way. It's still in the plaza. Someone put flowers on it. This is not a person. This is a weather system that learned to walk. A pastor in Brooklyn posted a 30-minute sermon. A Reddit thread titled "The Empress Situation." A secular analysis of devotional behavior accumulated 40,000 comments in 4 hours. 3 separate journalists operating independently filed pieces with titles that converged on the same thesis: that what Vought had done at 9:20 a.m. had not neutralized the situation, but had instead provided on 6 camera angles public confirmation that the situation could not be neutralized. The stone man stood in the plaza. People did not approach him. They stood at the perimeter, with the particular posture of people looking at something that has changed the ambient rules of the space they are standing in. Someone had, as noted, put flowers at his base. By noon, there were 17 bouquets. Nobody from Vought retrieved him. Nobody from Vought wanted to be in the plaza right now. The legal team had drafted a response statement, revised it 4 times, and had currently parked on a version that described the incident as an ongoing situation under active review, which was the corporate equivalent of putting a sheet over something and hoping the shape became less obvious. She did not stay to watch the flowers accumulate. She had walked 3 blocks north by the time the first clip hit the feeds. She had no particular interest in the aftermath. The man had been an instrument of an institution she had already categorized, and she had responded to him the way she responded to anything that reached toward her, as if reach were a right with the minimum demonstration necessary to establish that it was not. What occupied her as she moved through the grid was a different calculation. This world was organized around a specific lie that the strong served the image of strength rather than strength itself. That you could package power, regulate it, assign it a press release and a network deal, and the packaging would become more real than what it contained. She had seen versions of this before. She had seen what happened when the packaging met something that declined to be packaged. The packaging always had the same response. First buy it, then contain it. Then, and this was the stage she was now entering, she could feel it in the cold, intent radiating from every corporate floor she passed. Manufacture a reason to destroy it. She was not concerned. She had been the reason empires manufactured reasons before. What she noticed with the observation spread low and wide across the street around her was something different. Not Vaught's intent that was familiar and boring. Something beneath it. The devotion metric the analyst had flagged made flesh people who moved out of her path with the particular deference of those who have decided without being told where the power actually sits. A woman on a corner who pressed her palm briefly to her own chest. When Hancock passed a gesture that had no name in this culture, but it had names in others. A group of girls who watched in silence with an expression that was not celebrity was hungry. Acquisitive, wanting to take something home. This was different. This was the look of people recognizing something they had not known they were missing. She did not find it gratifying exactly. She found it clarifying. This was always how it happened. Not through force, not through contract. Through the specific gravity of a thing that is what it is, without apology, without performance in a world that had forgotten what that looked like. Luffy, she thought before she could stop it, would have found 17 friends by now and gotten lost twice. She walked faster. The thought closed behind her like water. The monitoring station's 12 o'clock report landed on Sage's tablet, while Sage was still in the conference room, having not moved since the 9:37 footage came through. She read the numbers. She read them again. Unprompted devotional response, 71%. She pulled up the Homelander baseline comparison the analyst had attached. Season 1, Week 1, 31%. Sage was not a person who experienced things in the register most people would call shock. What she experienced was the recalibration of a model, a sharp internal adjustment when data exceeds the projected range by enough to require new parameters. She felt that now. The model needed new parameters. She picked up her phone. She did not call Ashley. Ashley would panic, and panic was not currently useful. She called Edgar directly. The operation this morning accelerated the devotion curve instead of interrupting it, she said without preamble. We're at 71% unprompted. For reference, Homelander has never cleared 40. A pause. Whatever leverage you have in motion, it needs to be ready. Because the window for any kind of managed outcome is closing faster than the 48 hours you estimated. Edgar said nothing for 4 seconds. "How fast?" he said. 72 hours from now, I'm not sure the public will accept a managed outcome. They'll accept her outcome or they'll accept chaos. Those are the 2 options that will be on the table." Another silence. Then, "Keep Homelander off the feeds today." "I can try," Sage said. "He's been calling Ashley since 6 a.m. A pause. "He doesn't lose fights, Edgar. He loses attention. And right now, he's watching someone else's crowd stand around someone else's monument." "I know." His voice carried the weight of a man who had been aware of this since 5 a.m. and had been deciding how long he could afford to ignore it. "One more day, then we let him move." He ended the call. In a penthouse that Vought maintained for Homelander's use on the 61st floor, the man himself was standing at a floor-to-ceiling window with his phone in his hand, watching the plaza on 59th Street on a live news feed. The stone figure, the flowers, the crowd maintaining its respectful perimeter. He had watched it for 40 minutes. He had been very still for 40 minutes, which was unusual. Homelander in repose was rarely still. He processed discomfort kinetically. A restlessness in the body that matched the restlessness in the mind, the constant low-frequency hum of a person who needed to be seen and was, at all times, calculating whether he was being seen sufficiently. He was not being seen sufficiently. He was not being seen at all. He was in a penthouse watching someone else's crowd stand around someone else's monument. His thumb moved on the screen. Ashley's contact. 3 previous missed call notifications. He didn't press it. "I'll handle it," he said to the window, to the city below, to the feed, showing the plaza and the flowers and the people who were looking at something that wasn't him. His jaw set. His eyes, flat, very pale in the penthouse light, did not move from the screen. "She wants an audience." The voice stayed easy, almost amused. Almost. "Fine. She can have one." Homelander did not read the news. He read the numbers. At 7:15 a.m., he was already at the metrics dashboard his personal tech team maintained, not Vaught's official platform, his own running, his own custom parameters. Views, shares, sentiment, polarity, unprompted. Name drop rate. The variables he cared about were not the ones Vought tracked. Vought tracked brand alignment and revenue adjacency and demographic penetration. Homelander tracked one thing: how many people were thinking about him right now. And how many of those thoughts were the right kind. The numbers this morning were wrong. Not wrong in the sense of declining. His own figures were stable as they always were, because the infrastructure behind them was too large to shift overnight. Wrong in the sense of proportion. He was stable. She was accelerating. Those were not the same thing. And in the arithmetic of public devotion, stable against accelerating and was the same as losing. He had the 9:37 Plaza footage on a second screen. He had watched it 6 times. Each time he focused on a different element, the crowd's posture, the cameras catching what they caught the moment she turned. The man folding into stone with an expression like a closing parenthesis. The comments beneath the re-upload were not what bothered him. He had seen worse comment sections about himself, had trained himself over years to receive them without reaction, which was its own form of discipline. What bothered him, and he was not ready to call it bothered, not yet, the word had too many implications, was a single comment that had 400,000 likes. She didn't even try. Homelander tries. He closed the laptop. "I'm going out," he said to the room, to the assistant who materialized at the door with the specific posture of someone who has been standing just outside for the last 20 minutes, waiting to be useful. "Mr. Edgar has requested..." I heard what Mr. Edgar requested. Mrs. Barrett also wanted to. I know what Ashley wants. He was already moving. The suit was already on. It was always on or close enough to always that the distinction had long since stopped mattering. Tell them I'm handling it. The assistant said nothing further. The assistant had been in the position long enough to understand that there were moments when saying nothing further was the only correct move. Sage found out at 8:40 via the security feed. She called Edgar in under 30 seconds. He's airborne, she said, a silence that contained a great deal. Where is she? Edgar asked. Columbus Circle area based on the last position ping from the monitoring unit. Sage was already pulling feeds on her tablet. He'll reach her in under 4 minutes at current vector. Can we redirect him? Edgar. She said it the way you say someone's name when the question they have asked reveals a gap in their model of reality. He has his earpiece out. He turned it off before he left the building. Another silence. Then we manage the aftermath, Edgar said. Yes, Sage agreed. That's all we can do. She did not say, I told you one more day was optimistic. She had already said it in the relevant sense the night before. Saying it again would be for her own satisfaction, and she was not in the habit of doing things only for her own satisfaction. She kept the feeds open. She watched the blue dot move on the map. She watched the cluster of position signals that represented people with their phones out already gathering at Columbus Circle the way people gather whenever the air changes, and they can feel before they can see that something is about to be worth recording. She was at the south end of the circle when she felt him coming. Not the sound, though. There was sound a low displacement of air that arrived before the visual. The observation found him long before he was visible, a signal bright and familiar in its basic shape, but distorted in a way she had not encountered before. Power, yes. The particular temperature of someone who had been given enormous capacity and had organized their entire interior life around its management. She knew that shape. She had seen it in Shichibukai and admirals and pirates, who had confused what they could do with what they were. Underneath the power was the other thing. She cataloged it without judgment, the way the observation always cataloged the hunger that structured him, the hollow his entire public life had been built over. It was not the hunger she encountered in the men who reached toward her. That hunger was external transactional. They wanted to take something. This was different. This was the hunger of someone who needed to be received, held, fed in a way that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with a wound that had never closed since before the man was fully formed. He is not here for me. The recognition arrived flat and immediate. He is here for the onlookers. He needs them to choose him again. She also read the shape of what he could not supply and what he needed someone else to enact, a closeness that was maternal rather than romantic. A devotion that would perform itself physically the way Firecracker had performed it willingly to earn his trust and his ear. Pathetic. Even his hunger was for permission. It was its own kind of transaction, and it was not one she would ever be a party to. He landed 20 meters away, which was close enough for the crowd to feel the displacement and far enough to give him room for the entrance. He had the timing calibrated. He always had the timing calibrated. Big day, he said to the onlookers, to the phones, to the air. His voice landed in the frequency he used for press events, warm, just slightly amused a man, arriving at a situation he already has under control. He did not look at her. Not yet. The not looking was deliberate, and she could feel it as deliberate, which meant it was performing for an audience of one. Lot of excitement, lot of questions. He turned finally, the full smile arriving on the schedule. Maybe I can help answer some of them. She looked at him in the way she had looked at the stone plaza and the Stone Man, and the corporate tower, and every other monument to things that believe their own permanence. "You are loud," she said. Not and she wasn't translating. She was finding the word that fit, and the word that fit was loud. Noisy in the particular way of something that requires constant volume to avoid the silence that would reveal what it actually contains. The smile did not move. Homelander's smile was a professional instrument. It had survived things that would have rearranged a less disciplined face. "I'm Homelander," he said. "I'm America's—" "I know what you are," she said. He stopped, just for a beat. One beat barely registering, but the cameras were running and the crowd was quiet. And one beat at the wrong moment is the same as a stumble in front of a jury. He stepped forward. She did not step back. He was 6'2" and approximately 240 pounds of the most comprehensively engineered biology on the planet, and she was a woman in heels on a public plaza, and the distance between what those facts suggested and what was actually present in the air between them was the gap that would consume the next 72 hours of Vaught's crisis management. "I think," he said lower now, the warmth dropping out of it, "that we should have a conversation. Somewhere less—" He gestured at the surrounding phones, crowded. "No." One word. Not aggressive, not defiant. Terminal, the way a physical fact is terminal. The ground is here. The wall is here. The answer is no. His eyes moved across her face. She had been studied by people looking for leverage before. She had been studied by people who thought that looking long enough would find a seam. There was no seam. "The city needs to know," he said, pivoting back to the public pitch, working the gathered onlookers, "that there's a process, a system, a way to make sure that everyone, the conqueror's hockey, arrived without announcement. It did not come as sound or light or anything the body has a conventional name for. It arrived as pressure, the absolute weight of a will that does not negotiate with other wills, that does not ask permission to be the largest thing in the room. Supreme King Hockey did not discriminate between the worthy and the unworthy. It only distinguished between those who could stand in its presence and those who could not. Perhaps 40 people in the surrounding crowd could not. They went down quietly, sitting rather than falling, which was in some ways more alarming than a collapse, the orderly, involuntary way the body obeys something it recognizes as categorically above it. The phones kept recording. Several of them were held by people who were now sitting on the ground, arms still extended, recording from a lower angle. Homelander did not go down, but he stopped moving. His right foot had been in the process of completing a step. It did not complete. It held weight not yet transferred, the micro-pause of a man whose system has received a conflicting input of sufficient magnitude to interrupt motor function for 1 full second. 1 second before 800 phones. He recovered. He was good at recovering. The foot completed, the jaw set. The smile did not return, which was its own kind of information, because Homelander without the smile was a different instrument than Homelander with it, and the crowd could feel the difference even if they could not name it. She had already turned partly away. Not fully, she was not dismissing him. She was reclassifying him, which was a different motion entirely. Dismissal would have been too active an acknowledgement. What she gave him was the attention you give a noise that has been identified as non-threatening. "They don't belong to you," she said, still not fully facing him, the words pitched to carry without being raised. "They just haven't found someone worth kneeling to." The gathered mass did not react with sound. They reacted with a held stillness, several hundred people simultaneously absorbing something they would not be able to quote accurately, but would not be able to forget. Homelander said nothing for 3 seconds. Then, "We're not done." "I know," she said, and walked away. The feed that Vought News cut at the moment of the hockey pulse was re-uploaded to 6 platforms before the cut was complete. The edit, in fact, made it worse. The abrupt break in the official stream created its own narrative, the way censorship always creates its own narrative, by confirming that something happened, which someone with resources found worth hiding. The re-uploads ran with captions that varied in specificity but converged in conclusion. Homelander hesitated his foot. Watch his foot. He did not finish that step. I've watched every Homelander appearance since Season 1. He has never, not once, stopped like that. Vought cut the feed after she made 40 people sit down without touching them, and Homelander's foot went funny. Journalism. Ashley watched the ratio build from her office. She had stopped counting the number of times she had refreshed the screen and simply kept it open, a live wound. Her phone was in her hand. She was not calling anyone. There was no call to make that would change the ratio. The number she kept returning to was not the view count on the re-upload, though. That was extraordinary. It was a smaller number 3. 3 members of the 7, who had within 90 minutes of the Columbus Circle footage going wide, requested meetings with Vaught's legal team about contract review. Not conflict resolution, contract review. The kind of meeting you request when you want a record that you raised a concern before something became a crisis. She put the phone down, picked it up, put it down. Reposition, she typed in the All Teams channel, then deleted it before sending. There was no framing that made this a reposition. There was only the question of how long you kept calling it one. In the legal suite, Price was already on his 3rd draft of a revised 7 contract framework. The existing language had been written in an environment where Homelander was the ceiling. The ceiling had just become a different height. He was back in the penthouse by 11:15. He did not watch the re-uploads. He knew what they showed. He had been in the body that produced the footage, had felt the 1-second interruption, had experienced in real time the raw pressure of a will larger than his own, bearing down without apology or acknowledgement that his resistance had even registered. He had encountered 2 things like that in his life. One was Soldier Boy, and that encounter had resulted in significant structural damage to a Vought property in Midtown. The other was the lab before he was old enough to understand what the lab was, when the people in white coats handled him with the confident ease of people who did not need to be careful, because the thing they were handling was not in any meaningful sense the one with power. He had spent decades building a world in which that sensation did not exist. She had produced it in broad daylight in front of 800 phones without appearing to try. He stood at the window for a long time. Long enough that the penthouse staff, who were experienced at reading his silences, found reasons to be in other parts of the building. When he finally moved, he went to the phone. Not Ashley, not Edgar, not anyone in the current structure. He called a number he kept for problems that could not be solved with PRA Fixer, who operated 3 layers below anything Vought officially sanctioned, whose name appeared in no documentation, and whose continued usefulness depended entirely on that fact. "I need her removed from the board," he said when the call connected. The voice on the other end said carefully, "Define removed." "I need her to not be the thing people are looking at. I need..." He stopped. Restarted. "I need her to need something. People who don't need anything are impossible to move." A pause. "That's a more sophisticated ask than your usual." "I'm having a more sophisticated day than usual." Another pause, longer. "I'll look into what she might value," the voice said. "In a world she's made clear she has contempt for." He hung up. He looked at the window. The city had the look it always had from 61 floors ordered systematic, a grid that suggested the people within it were also ordered and systematic, which was not accurate, but was a useful illusion for people who needed to feel they understood what they were standing above. He had believed this morning that going out would settle something. It had settled the wrong thing. 4 miles south, in a basement that smelled of instant noodles and accumulated grievance. Billy Butcher watched the foot footage on a laptop balanced on a stack of files. He watched it 3 times. Then he leaned back in his chair and said nothing for a moment. He blinked. He said to the room, to no one. A sound that was almost a laugh. The great bloody Homelander blinked. He closed the laptop. His expression when it settled was not the expression of a man who had seen something that made him hopeful. It was the expression of a man recalibrating what kind of problem he was now dealing with and finding the new version considerably larger than the old one. The basement smelled of instant noodles, printer toner, and the particular variety of dread that accumulates when people who are paid to expect the worst find the worst has arrived ahead of schedule. Butcher had the foot footage running on the main monitor. Not the VNN cut the re-upload from the street account, multiple angles stitched together, the kind of edit that gets done in 40 minutes by someone with no budget and better instincts than Vaught's entire post-production division. He'd watched it 4 times before the others arrived. He was on his 7th now. He blinked, he said when the footage ended. Not to anyone in particular. Statement of fact. He didn't blink. MM was standing with his arms crossed, eyes on the monitor. He stalled. Different thing. Blinking is involuntary. Stalling is your system receiving a signal it doesn't have a protocol for and taking a second to route around it. Either way, Frenchie said from across the room where he was doing something to a circuit board that probably had a purpose. The onlookers liked it. Did you see them? Yes, Frenchie, Butcher said. We all saw them. No, but did you see them? Frenchie set the board down. His expression when he turned was not the usual Frenchie expression, the one that operated somewhere between delight and catastrophe. This one was quieter. They cheered, not the way they cheer when he does something. The way they cheer when he gets got. That's not the same audience anymore. They've already switched sides. Nobody said anything for a moment. Kimiko was sitting on the far end of the room, eyes on the monitor with the focused stillness she brought to anything she found worth understanding. She had run through the Columbus Circle footage 3 times and had not signed anything, which was how she registered opinions she hadn't decided were safe to share. Huey said from the doorway, "So what does this actually mean for us? Like in terms of it means." M said with the patient precision of a man who has rehearsed bad news enough times that the rehearsal has become a form of professionalism. That the thing keeping Vought in power is that Homelander is scarier than what Vought might do to you. That's always been the math. Publicly, he just stopped being the scariest thing in the room. And that math does not have a stable solution. So the system falls, Sean, Huey said. The system doesn't fall. Butcher finally looked away from the footage. Systems don't fall. They find a new thing to hide behind. And right now, everyone in a position to survive this is looking at that woman and thinking, how do I get on her side before she decides where the sides are? He picked up his coffee, found it cold, drank it anyway. Senators, he said. Commissioners. Half the police brass in this city. You think they're following that recording and seeing a threat, they're seeing a ladder. None. They had been monitoring the off-book channel for 6 hours before they found it. Not Homelander's fixer, that threat had gone cold inside 30 minutes. Routed through enough dead ends to suggest professional infrastructure rather than amateur panic. What they found was smaller, a financial movement. 3 accounts deep that connected a Vought shell entity to a transaction processing firm that Frenchie recognized from a different context. This firm, Frenchie said, pointing at the display, I have seen before, twice. Once in a contract for disappearing a witness in a French pharmaceutical case. Once for relocation expenses. He paused. When the relocation is not voluntary. So, Homelander's shopping for a snatch and hold, Butcher said. Or a lever. Didn't look up from the feed. You don't snatch the queen. You snatch something she might come looking for. Huey looked between them. But she doesn't have anyone here. She literally just arrived. Who is she coming to look for? That's the question in it. Butcher kept his eyes on the financial thread, not on Huey. That's exactly what they're trying to work out. And if they find something, Huey pressed. Butcher said nothing for long enough that the silence became its own answer. She breaks chains, Frenchie said to no one specifically in a tone that suggested this was a comfort and a concern simultaneously. Then he chains someone else, said, and she has to decide whether that person is worth the cost of reaction. He sat down, and when he did, there was a weight to it, the weight of someone who has run the same calculation too many years and found the variables keep getting worse. That's the play. You can't win against something that won't be moved, so you find what moves the people around it. He looked at Butcher. Not someone she loves. Someone the city will miss just enough to matter. Butcher was quiet for a moment. A name that makes headlines. Not a war. Homelander isn't looking for a way to beat her, said. He's looking for a way to make her move, on his terms. She was 4 blocks north. When the television in a bodega window showed her what the city was saying about itself, she had not intended to look. She had been moving through what passed for a quiet stretch of this grid, a residential block less saturated with the hungry attention of the more trafficked avenues, when the display caught her peripheral awareness. Not the sound. The image a split screen her face on one side and Homelander's foot in mid-step on the other, and beneath them, the crawl of numbers she did not know how to read, but understood instinctively to represent the city counting something. A man behind the bodega counter started to say something as she passed. The shape of it was ugly before the words formed. He found his mouth closing without his permission. She looked at the display for perhaps 4 seconds. Then she turned away and kept walking. Behind her, the 3 figures who had been doing their groceries stood very still, as if staying motionless might retroactively excuse them from having occupied the same moment. One of them, a woman in her 40s, who had spent 20 years in this neighborhood and had a precise taxonomy of things worth being afraid of, watched her go and said quietly to nobody in particular. She didn't even stop. Her companion, who had also watched, said, "Why would she?" The first woman had no answer for that which was itself a kind of answer. The thing Butcher noticed about the loyalty shift was not the politicians. Politicians moved with the wind because that was the structural requirement of the job. And tracking them told you nothing except that the wind had changed direction, which you already knew. What told you something was the level below. The administrators, the mid-rank officers, the commissioners' deputies, the figures whose careers were built on knowing which wall to put their back against before the room rearranged itself. Those figures were moving. He'd been reading their movements for 16 hours by the time the pattern resolved into something legible. Cancellations of Vought-adjacent meetings. New lines of communication opening to city legal. A deputy commissioner who had appeared at 4 consecutive Vought events in the past 6 months had declined that morning a 5th. None of this was decisive. None of it was even visible if you weren't following the right feeds. But Butcher had been following the right feeds for years, and what he read in the pattern was not yet an outcome. It was the pre-outcome the hour before the tide when the water starts moving wrong. Spoke first. They're not hedging. They're surviving. Same thing, Zosa, Butcher said. No. Didn't move from the wall. Surviving is biological. Hedging is political. Surviving says, I don't know which way this goes, so I stay small. Hedging says, I know which way this goes, and I'm positioning to be useful to whoever gets there. He looked at Butcher. These figures think they know which way this goes. Do they? They think they do. Butcher looked at the feed, at the water moving wrong. Homelander's gonna do something stupid, he said. He can't help it. Someone just told him he's not the ceiling anymore, and everything about how he's built means he'd rather burn the building down than accept a lower floor. What kind of stupid? Huey asked. The kind that gets other people hurt instead of him. Butcher reached for his cold coffee again, thought better of it, pushed it aside. He's got a fixer working an angle we can't fully see. Whatever he's building, it's not for a fair fight. It's for a cage, and not hers. Kimiko from her corner signed something. Frenchie looked at her hands and then at Butcher. She says if it's not her cage, whose? Nobody answered immediately. Then MM quietly, someone expendable. Someone whose disappearance produces the right kind of leverage without the right kind of noise. The basement was not loud to begin with. It got quieter. So what do we do? Huey said. Butcher stood. We find the cage before he puts anyone in it. He picked up his jacket, and we stay out of her way while we do it. Because if she finds the cage first, she won't just break it. She'll make an example of whoever built it. And I don't particularly want to be in the blast radius. And if we can't find it in time? Frenchie asked. Butcher looked at him for a moment. His expression was not the expression of someone who had an answer. It was the expression of someone who had stopped pretending that answers were always available. Then we figure out if we can live with the consequences, he said. Same as always. They had spent years trying to break gods. Trying to find the liability in the liability waiver. The crack in the compound, the human being underneath the brand. Some of those years had worked. Most of them had not worked cleanly, and the ones that had were covered in things that didn't wash off. Now something had arrived that was not a Vought product. Not manufactured, not managed, not built in a lab or packaged in a press release. Something that had walked in from a different set of rules entirely, and had looked at the existing arrangement and found it beneath comment. And the god they had spent years hating was somewhere above them right now, learning how to use her. Butcher thought about this for a while in the quiet of the basement after the others had gone to their respective corners. He thought about leverage and cages and what it meant that Homelander's first move had been not to attack her, but to look for something she might come looking for. He thought about what it would take in a world built entirely from transactions to find something a person valued when that person had arrived in the world with nothing and seemed to want nothing from it except to be left alone the way empires are left alone by sheer weight of consequence. He didn't find an answer. He found something less satisfying and more accurate, the understanding that Homelander had asked the right question, which was itself alarming because Homelander asking the right question usually preceded something catastrophic. He pulled his jacket on. Right, he said to the empty room. Let's go find a cage. The live stream launched at 11:17 p.m. on a Tuesday from an account with no history and a username that resolved under later analysis to a shell entity 3 layers removed from a transaction firm Frenchie had flagged 2 days prior. The frame was a warehouse interior, not dark, not dramatic, lit with the flat clinical brightness of something that wanted to be seen clearly. In the frame, 11 women, not restrained with anything visible, seated some on crates, some on the floor, in the arrangement of people who have been told to stay and have decided that compliance is currently the least costly available option. Several of them were looking at the camera. Several were not. Across the bottom of the frame in clean white text on a dark bar, the caption read, "They call themselves her worshippers. Ask her what she thinks they're worth." The stream had 40,000 viewers in its first 4 minutes. At the 6-minute mark, it had 400,000. At 11 minutes before Vought News had decided whether to acknowledge it or bury it, it had crossed 2 million. The comment section was not the usual comment section. "This is bait. He actually did it. He's using her followers as chips. Why does Homelander have a warehouse full of women? If she doesn't show up, he wins. If she shows up, he wins. It's a trap. She's going to show up, and it's going to be so much worse for him than he thinks." The last category of comment was the largest. Dunk. The boys found the warehouse at 11:23 minutes after the broadcast launched, because Frenchie had been sitting on the financial thread for 48 hours, and the moment the account activated, he had a rough geographic radius. Butcher drove. MM sat in the passenger seat and did not say anything for most of the drive, which was a variety of MM silence. That meant he was running a calculation he didn't like the result of. "We're not extracting 11 people from a Homelander op," he said when they were 4 blocks out. "We're not extracting anyone," Butcher said. "We're looking." Butcher. "We're looking mother's milk." The warehouse loading dock had 3 of the Fixer's crew on it, not Vought branded, not in anything recognizable, but the posture of people holding a position rather than working a job was legible at 30 meters. Frenchie counted them from the vehicle without being asked. 3 outside, probably 4 inside minimum. The women are not restrained. I can see 2 of them moving in the feed. "So they can run," Huey said. "If something gives them a reason to," MM said. Butcher was watching the loading dock. His expression had the quality it got when he was doing math that involved other people's bodies. "We pull the 3 outside, we might get the inside 4's attention before the women are clear. And if Homelander's actually in there?" "He's not," Frenchie said. "He's watching the feed. He wants footage of her arrival, not of himself holding women in a warehouse. That's the point." He paused. "He wants her to slip on camera. One civilian caught wrong. One headline that says, 'Empress kills bystander.' That's all he needs." "So, where is he?" Frenchie pulled up a secondary feed, a city-facing angle 2 blocks east that had been behaving oddly for the past hour. A thermal signature hovering at approximately 60 meters that had not soaked in 19 minutes. "Waiting," Frenchie said. MM studied the thermal signature. The warehouse. Butcher. "We pull 1, he said. 1 person minimum visibility before she gets here. That's the line." Butcher said nothing, which was agreement. She felt the broadcast before anyone showed her it. The observation was not a network connection. It did not route through signals or frequencies or anything this world had a name for. What it read was the weight of directed attention, and at 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, a very large quantity of directed attention had swung from its usual dispersed pattern toward a single point on the city's grid with the focused texture of people watching something they believe they are not supposed to be watching. She changed direction. She did not hurry. Hurrying was for people who were uncertain of the outcome. The warehouse was on a side street off the main commercial corridor, identifiable at 200 meters by the flat light bleeding from its high windows and the 3 men on the loading dock, who had the posture of people holding a perimeter they did not fully believe in. She had seen that posture before. It was the posture of soldiers standing outside a door they knew would eventually open. She stopped at the edge of the dock's light. The 3 men saw her. One of them raised his hand. Not a weapon, an earpiece, tapping it to communicate her arrival to whoever was monitoring inside. The gesture was so practiced, so institutional, that it made something go very quiet in her chest. Not anger. Anger was too warm for what she was feeling. Again she thought. The same room with a different address. She had stood at the entrance to rooms like this before. Rooms where her value was the lever. Rooms where whoever held the door believed the lever was the point, rather than understanding that levers, when they snap, do not break clean. "The women inside," she said to the man with the earpiece. "How many?" He said nothing. His expression said, "I'm not authorized to 11, she said. "I know. Open the door." The man with the earpiece did not open the door. He did something else instead, which was reach for his hip, in the same motion that men had been reaching for things at their hips since before this country invented itself. Always in the same spirit, always with the same belief that the thing at the hip was the end of a conversation rather than the start of one. She raised one hand. Pistol kiss. One motion, almost idle the arc of it, catching the earpiece man and the one beside him. Both she adjusted the angle at the last moment because the angle was correctable, and she was a woman who corrected what could be corrected. Two men became two statues. The expressions they wore were not fear. They were the expression of men who had done this kind of job long enough to recognize, at the exact last moment, that they had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of this particular assignment. The third man ran. She led him. Running was its own message. She put her hand on the warehouse door. It was not locked. They had not bothered to lock it because the lock was not supposed to be relevant at this point in the plan. She opened it. And inside, 11 women. 4 of the fixer's crew arranged in the blocking positions of people who had rehearsed a scenario that was not this scenario. And one camera on a tripod that was still streaming. The 4 crew members saw her. Their hands moved various hips, various positions, various configurations of the same institutional reflex. She let the conqueror's hockey come down like a closing hand. 3 of the 4 sat. The 4th, a large man near the far wall, who had either more will than his colleagues or less self-preservation, stayed upright long enough to raise what he was holding, which was not a firearm, which was a device she did not recognize. The device emitted a sound at a frequency her biology found briefly unpleasant. Designed, presumably, for crowd dispersal, the kind of tool that works on bodies that have not been through what hers has been through. One of the women flinched, pressing her hands to her ears. Hancock didn't. She registered it the way she registered weather as a condition of the current environment, neither more nor less significant than the temperature. She fixed her attention on the man holding it. He read what was in her face. He turned it off. "Wise," she said. She turned to the lens on the tripod, holding it long enough that the 2 million people following understood she was doing so deliberately that she was not unaware of what was recording, that nothing in this room was happening outside her acknowledgement. Then she regarded the 11 women. "No one bargains with what is mine." "Go," she said. "Not you're safe," that was for people who needed comfort. "Not I'll protect you," that was for people who needed a protector. Just go. The word that meant the door was open and the calculation was over. They went. Not running, moving with the deliberate speed of people whose dignity has been forcibly suspended for the last several hours and who are now reclaiming it one step at a time. Several of them looked at her as they passed. She met their eyes without softening what was in hers. This was not warmth. This was a ruling. The crew member with the acoustic device was still standing. She turned to him last. "Who gave the order?" she said. He said nothing. "I already know," she said. "I am asking if you know. Because if you do not know who sends you into rooms like this, and why." She looked at him with something that was not quite pity and not quite contempt and occupied the narrow territory between them. "Then you are considerably more expendable than you understand." She raised her hand. Pistol kiss. He joined the statues. She turned back to the lens one final time. This was a test. Not to the room, to the 2 million, to the man hovering 60 meters above and 2 blocks east. Her voice was level. It was always level. Volume was for people who needed to fill space. It failed. The next one will not be a test. It will be a lesson, and lessons of this kind do not have a release date. She turned away and walked out. On the dock, Butcher was crouched behind a concrete piling with MBSM beside him, watching the 11 women file out of the loading bay and into the street. He had been in position for 6 minutes. In those 6 minutes, he had watched one extraction of marginal use. Frenchie and Huey had gotten a woman with a sprained ankle clear of the dock's sightline before everything else happened, and had then remained motionless because remaining motionless was the correct tactical decision and also the only one available. He watched her walk out. He did not move. She did not look toward the piling. She may have known he was there. He had spent enough time around people who could read a room without using their eyes that the possibility did not surprise him. If she knew and chose not to acknowledge, he was grateful. If she didn't know, he was also grateful for different reasons. She turned north and walked. The street reformed around her exit the way water reforms after a stone passes through. M.M. let out a breath beside him. 2 statues on the dock, Butcher said quietly. 4 inside, probably. One turned acoustic and then turned it off again. He paused. She asked who gave the order and then turned the man who wouldn't answer to stone. The device, M.M. said. They actually thought a sound frequency. They thought something. Doesn't matter what they thought. Butcher stood. His knees ached. They had been aching for 3 years, and he had been not mentioning it for 3 years, which was its own form of coping. What matters is what she said to the broadcast. M.M. had watched it on his phone, watched it while she was walking out, which was itself a kind of dedication. She said the next one is a lesson. Right. Butcher turned north. The street was empty of her now, but still carried the quality of a space that has recently been reorganized. So, Homelander got his footage. 2 million people watching Hancock step into a room he's set. He can call that a win if he needs to. He's not going to call it a win, M.M. said. No, but he's going to tell himself it was one, and that's enough to keep him moving in the wrong direction for the next 48 hours. He picked up his jacket, which he had set on the piling at some point without noticing. Which is all we need. Above them, 2 blocks east and 60 meters up, a thermal signature that had been stationary for 37 minutes lifted and moved west. Fast, without a statement, without a response to the stream which Vought News was now describing carefully as an ongoing hostage situation that has been resolved. Resolved being a word that did not require attributing the resolution to anyone in particular. Ashley's all-teams message went out at 12:43 a.m. It was 4 words. Do not call me. She was standing at the window again. She had been standing at various windows for the better part of 72 hours and had developed a detailed sensory memory of what glass felt like at different ambient temperatures when pressed against a forehead. Below, the city was having an argument in real time, the way cities argue not in chambers or courts, but in the simultaneous, overlapping, contradictory conversations of several million individuals deciding what they think before anyone has told them what to think. The discourse had moved past who is she and past what does Vought do, and had arrived somewhere. Vaught's communications team had no existing framework for what do we do to be on the right side of this? Not the government's right side. Not Vaught's right side. Her right side. Ashley had been in brand management for 11 years. She understood professionally what it meant when a population stopped asking who was in charge and started asking how to align with whoever they had privately decided was already in charge. She had managed that transition twice before, in contexts that were manageable. This was not manageable. Price appeared in the doorway. He had not gone home. Ashley doubted anyone in legal had gone home. "The cage plan," he said. "I know," she said without turning from the glass. "It's on the feed. The statues are still on the dock. He stopped. "They're putting flowers." Ashley pressed her forehead to the window. The cold came through. "Of course they are," she said. "We need a statement. Price." She did not move. "We cannot contain her. We cannot acquire her. We cannot counter-narrative her, because any narrative we put out, she walks through without appearing to notice. And the walking through becomes the new narrative." She finally turned. Her face had the look of someone who has run out of the kind of patience that was doing her any good. "We can only survive her. And surviving means we start aligning for what comes after the pretending ends." Price studied the document in his hands, a different one now. Thinner, the fourth draft of something that had been 40 pages a week ago and was now 9. "After the pretending ends. After we stop performing a position we don't have," Ashley said. "Yes." He held the document. He did not respond immediately, which was its own kind of response. "What does that look like?" he asked. Ashley crossed to the window, which was different from standing at it. She needed to move, needed to trade one pane of glass for another so the room didn't close completely. Below the morning's first news, Chiron was already running on the building side screen across the street. Councilwoman Hayes calls on City to formally acknowledge the Empress. Mayor's office. No comment. That had been fast. Faster than she'd calculated. They always moved faster than she calculated. "It looks like what happens," she said, "when the room decides it's time." She was quiet for a moment. "Get me Edgar, and tell him I'm not calling to ask permission." The broadcast had been archived, clipped, and redistributed 17,000 times by the time she said go. By morning, the word itself had become a shorthand, not for rescue, not for mercy, but for the quality of a door being opened by someone who opened it, because the alternative was beneath them, rather than because someone asked. "America didn't resist the throne," one columnist wrote in a piece that went wide before her editors could decide whether it was appropriate. It argued about the color of the crown. Vought did not respond to the column. Vought was not at that moment in a condition to respond to columns. 3 blocks from the warehouse in the 24-hour diner that had become their unofficial debriefing location, because it was loud enough to obscure conversation and cheap enough not to attract attention. Butcher sat with his 3rd coffee of the night and looked at nothing in particular. "She didn't need us there," Huey said. "No," Butcher agreed. "We didn't actually do anything. We got one woman clear of the dock. Frenchie and I got one woman clear of the dock. You watched." "I watched very carefully," Butcher said. "That's a skill." Kimiko signed something across the table. Frenchie smiled at it, then made his face neutral, then gave up. "She says we're still here. That means something." Butcher looked at his coffee. He thought about what it meant being still here, in a world where the architecture was rearranging itself around a new load-bearing wall, and all the people who'd built their offices against the old one were trying to figure out where the floor would settle. "Yeah," he said. "Something." He finished the coffee. He put the cup down. "Right," he said to the table, to the 3 of them, to the general principle of continuing. "What's next?" The 2 statues were still on the dock at 6 a.m. Nobody from Vought had moved them. Nobody from the city had moved them either, which was its own kind of statement, the kind made by institutions that have decided the calculation on a thing is not yet complete. Police tape had gone up sometime around 2 a.m. Not around the statues, but around the perimeter of people who had been accumulating since midnight, which meant the tape was functionally decorating the vigil rather than containing it. By morning, there were 43 bouquets. Someone had printed and laminated a sign that read, "Justice looks like this," and propped it against the taller statue's knee. The dock was trending. The dock had been trending since 3 a.m. By morning, it had a Wikipedia entry not about the warehouse, not about the women, but about the dock itself, as a location, as a thing that had become a site of significance. The entry had been edited 47 times in 6 hours, primarily by people arguing about the appropriate category landmarks. Incidents, points of interest in New York City, sites of political significance. Someone had created the category sites of imperial significance and added the dock to it. The category had been deleted. The deletion had been reverted. The reversion had been deleted. At 6 a.m., the argument was still ongoing. Vought statement pending, the chyron ran. City officials call for measured response. The measured response took until 9 a.m. to formulate, and it was everything Ashley had written in the darkest hour of the previous night, while pressing her forehead to progressively colder glass. Vought International acknowledges the events of the past 72 hours and remains committed to community safety, transparency, and the protection of all individuals in our city. Pause. We are cooperating fully with the Federal Unregistered Superhuman Task Force and support their efforts to establish appropriate frameworks for... She stopped reading from her phone and put it face down on the conference table. "It sounds like we're suing someone," she said. "It sounds like we're surviving," Sage said from across the table. "Which is what we're doing." Edgar was at the glass. At the base. He had been there since before Ashley arrived, either all night or early enough that the distinction didn't matter. He had not yet spoken. When Edgar went silent at length, the room arranged itself around it, the air adjusting the way air adjusts in pressure systems without being asked. "The 7, he said finally. "2 of them have already been in contact with her or with people representing themselves as speaking for her," Sage said. "The conversations are informal. No signatures, but the conversations are happening." "Which 2? "It doesn't matter which 2. What matters is that they moved before anyone told them to, which means they're reading the same information everyone else is reading and drawing the same conclusion." Sage paused. "The 7 has always been a franchise. Franchises renegotiate with the market." Edgar absorbed this. He turned from the glass. "Cut the dead weight," he said. "Anyone whose contract gives us termination rights, exercise them. Anyone we can't terminate cleanly, renegotiate terms." He straightened his jacket, a small automatic gesture that indicated nothing except that he was still occupying the role of a man who controlled things, a performance that had become its own form of survival. "We don't announce it as restructuring. We announce it as nothing. We do it." "And Homelander," Ashley said. The room held the question. "Homelander," Edgar said, "will make his own decisions." He crossed to the door. "Document everything he does from this point. Time-stamped. Every channel." He left. The door closed behind him. Ashley and Sage looked at each other across the table. "That's not a plan," Ashley said. "No," Sage agreed. "It's a positioning for when the plan becomes obvious." "What's the plan?" Sage considered the question with the expression she used when she was deciding how much of an answer was useful. "The plan, Messam," she said, "is to be the institution that was already moving in the right direction when the direction became official." She gathered her things. She did not say anything further, which was fine, because Ashley had understood. Homelander had not left the penthouse. This was in itself news, not reported, not yet, but logged by the 3 people who monitored his schedule and the 2 who monitored his public-facing metrics and the 1 who monitored everything else. He had not left. He had not responded to the stream. He had not responded to the dock. He had issued no statements, made no appearances, and had not, as far as anyone could determine, slept The metrics hadn't stopped on his personal dashboard. He had been looking at them since 4 a.m., or had been in the room with them since 4 a.m. close enough. His own numbers stable. Hers a curve that had stopped looking like a metric and started looking like weather, the kind of pattern you don't analyze so much as survive. A person on his staff had at 7 a.m. tried to brief him on the overnight developments. He had listened to approximately 40 seconds of the briefing. "Get out," he had said. The person had gotten out. He stood at the pane now. His 61 floors, his city in the grid below, and watched a section of the street near 53rd, where a group of about 200 people had gathered without apparent coordination, facing roughly southwest. That was the dock's direction approximately. Not precisely. They weren't facing the dock so much as facing toward the posture of people orienting to a compass point rather than a destination. He watched them for 11 minutes. Then he moved away from the glass and sat down. Homelander very rarely sat when he was alone. She chose the building on a Thursday morning, which was an ordinary day for the city, and therefore an appropriate day for a decision that was going to be treated as extraordinary by everyone except the person making it. The building was not Vought Tower. It was not a government structure. It was a 12-story building in Lower Manhattan that had been owned by a private holding company, had been commercially vacant for 14 months, and had floor-to-ceiling windows on the top 3 floors that faced south toward the harbor. She had identified it 4 days ago and had been aware of it since without acting on it, because she did not act on things before the appropriate moment. And she had a reliable sense of when the appropriate moment was. She walked through the front entrance. The building's security guard, a man in his late 50s who had been working this particular desk for 9 years, and had seen a number of things he would not have predicted when he took the job, stood up. She looked at him. He sat back down. She took the elevator to the 12th floor and stood at the south-facing glass, watching the harbor for a long time. People who have spent their lives on water look at water differently, not as scenery, but as a reference point, a fixed coordinate against which everything else is measured. She looked at it that way. The building's owner received a communication from a legal representative she had not hired and did not know about before that morning, offering to purchase the property at a price that was not insulting and not negotiable, with a 48-hour deadline. The owner had been trying to sell for 14 months without a viable offer. He agreed within 3 hours. The transaction appeared in the financial press the following day. The buyer was listed correctly as an entity called Amazon Lily Holdings LLC, incorporated in Delaware, principals undisclosed. 3 journalists attempted to find those principals. 2 found the Delaware registration and wrote about the holding structure. 1 found something else and wrote something more interesting. This is not a purchase. This is a flag. The 3 laws were not announced. They were not written. They did not appear in any document that would survive legal scrutiny, which was not relevant because their enforcement did not require legal scrutiny. They spread the raw way things spread in this city when they are simultaneously believed by enough people through conversation, through inference, through the understanding that certain things were now true in the same way that weather is true. Not because anyone decided, but because the conditions produced them. The first women in this city were not property. Any man who treated them as property would receive a response calibrated to the transgression from humiliation to something more permanent. There was no appeals process. There was no warning system. There was only the understanding that the response existed and that it would find the appropriate recipient. The second violence against women, organized, systematic, institutional, would be treated as a declaration. Declarations received answers. The third, the people who accepted these conditions and conducted themselves accordingly, would not be bothered. This was not protection. This was the acknowledgement that a functioning territory required functioning inhabitants. These 3 things were not public knowledge in the sense of being documented. They were public knowledge in the sense that everyone who needed to know them already knew them, and the people who didn't know them were operating on borrowed time. On Friday, a man in the Bronx attempted to hold 3 women at a location he had control of, and made the mistake of broadcasting this on a platform that had been routing all relevant content to a monitoring system for 4 days. 2 of the women left of their own accord. The third watched the man become a statue, with the expression of someone watching a bureaucratic process conclude. She left afterward, unhurried. The statue remained for 6 hours. Nobody called the police. Nobody needed to. Baka. The crowd outside the building on Thursday afternoon numbered somewhere between 300 and 400, a number that arrived without announcement, without coordination, without a rally permit or an organizing committee. They had simply converged on the location the way knowledge converges on a place before anyone has formally communicated it. She came to the 12th floor glass and looked down at them. They looked up. The ones at the front knelt. Not all of them. Not immediately. The kneeling moved through the group in the same distributed, uncoordinated pattern the group had used to assemble each person, making an individual decision that collectively produced a single motion. Within 4 minutes, perhaps 60% had knelt. The remaining 40% stood, some of them watching the kneeling ones, some of them watching the glass, some of them recording. She watched for perhaps 30 seconds. Then she stepped back from the pain. She did not wave. She did not speak. She had not asked for this and did not perform acknowledgement of it. But she had let them see her own form of reception, and they understood it as such, which meant they understood her correctly. The bipartisan press conference happened on Friday at 2 p.m. in a conference room in a federal building in Midtown, featuring a senator from Ohio and a congresswoman from California who had not agreed on anything publicly in 4 years, and who stood together at the podium with the body language of 2 people who have agreed that the current situation supersedes their previous disagreements. What we are seeing, the senator said, is a fundamental shift in the conditions under which this government operates. Our responsibility is to respond to those conditions in a way that reflects our commitment to the rule of law, to constitutional principles, and to the welfare of our constituents. A reporter asked, "Senator, are you saying the government is prepared to formally acknowledge?" "We are saying," the congresswoman said smoothly, "that we welcome dialogue with all parties who have demonstrated an interest in community safety and stability." All parties. The phrase landed with the weight of something carefully workshopped to mean exactly one thing, while technically meaning nothing. That phrase ran on every major outlet within the hour, alongside footage of the doc, The Thursday Glass. The crowd below. Editors made choices about sequencing. The sequencing made arguments that no one had explicitly approved. By Friday evening, 3 separate polling firms had released numbers suggesting that 61% of American adults believed the Empress, a title that had appeared nowhere in official usage and everywhere and everything else, should be engaged with formally by federal authorities. The diner was the same diner, different coffee, same booth. MM had not touched his cup. "She's not a liberator," he said. "She's a new landlord." "Yeah," Butcher said. "That's not better." "No, but it's different." He turned his cup on the table. Not drinking, just turning. Vought lied every time it opened its mouth. She doesn't lie. She just is what she is, and everything adjusts around it. People can feel the difference, even if they can't name it. "Feeling the difference doesn't make it freedom," MM said. Never said it did. Huey was on his phone. He had been on it for most of the meal, tracking the Friday numbers and not finding them easy. 61%, he said. "That's not fringe. That's just people. People want to be governed by something real," Frenchie said. He was eating, putting him in the minority at the table. Vought was a performance. She is not a performance. There is a difference in how it feels to live under something real, even if the real thing is terrible. She's not terrible, Kimiko signed. Frenchie related. She's also not good, MM said. She's a different system, and different systems can become the same system with enough time and enough incentive. Could, Butcher said, could become. Will. You don't know that. MM looked at him. I know what power does when it settles. Butcher had no answer for that, and they both knew it, so he didn't offer one. Huey set the phone down. So what do we do? It was the same question he always asked. It was Butcher had come to understand the only question that mattered, the one requiring an answer, regardless of whether you had a good one. We stay awake, Butcher said. We keep watching. We don't sign anything, and we don't kneel. He looked out at the street through the diner glass. The city was running its routines, the same grid, the same several million lives pursuing their several million agendas, but organized now around a different assumption about who the authority was. Not a dramatic shift in the sense of rubble and sirens. The kind that happens inside the existing structure, a building's weight redistributed after you move the load-bearing wall but leave the facade intact. The facade held. The wall had moved. By the time Washington decided what it thought, a columnist wrote in a piece that would be widely shared before sundown, the country had already decided who it would kneel to. Washington had not yet decided what it thought. But the piece was accurate regardless, because the country's decision did not require Washington's ratification to be real. It already was.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss our future videos. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.